You know, I feel bad for Thomas. Yeah, I agree, Heidi. His story is one of, I think, the most profound aspects to the story of the beginning of the life in the risen Christ. But it gets overshadowed because it always comes the Sunday after Easter. Now, Easter, the place is relatively packed. You've got all kinds of things going on. People all over the world know about the resurrection of Jesus. How many people know what's going on in this really short but really powerful story with Thomas's doubt? And that leads me to the question of, why did Jesus meet Thomas in his doubt? And why was Jesus right in giving room for Thomas's doubt? We talked about, traditionally as a church, the notion of doubting Thomas as a proof that doubt is not ideal, that you need to believe, and those who don't see and yet believe are somehow more superior to Thomas. But I want to take a different take on that today that I think will actually bring an even richer light to not only the story of Thomas himself, but also to the entire spectrum of those who are following Jesus. So, last week, who were the people that really made possible the beginning of the story of the resurrected Christ? The women, yes. Where were the men? Hiding because they were afraid. Okay, so we've got a starting point where the women are like, you know what? I don't care what happens. I'm going to go out to his tomb. We're going to embalm him properly, and we're going to take care of him. And then got surprised by the angel saying, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is risen. And then realizing, oh my goodness, the impossible thing has happened. Now, in the Gospels, did Jesus never tell them that he would be crucified? No, he told them quite a bit. In fact, he foreshadowed it in all four Gospels, have him foreshadowing his death. But when you don't want to believe a very problematic, inconvenient thing about what you think you're supposed to follow, do you tend to remember that as well? I know I don't. Until it smacks you like a 2x4 upside the head when it's the hinging point of the entire story. So we have the women who chose, no matter what, to go to the tomb to ensure that Jesus got his proper burial rites. You have the disciples up in the upper room, terrified. Now, if your leader just got executed in a public and humiliating and shaming way when you thought he was supposed to liberate you from the people who executed him, raise your hand if you would necessarily want to go out in public and be around people. Probably not. So there's a little bit of room for compassion for the understandable trauma reaction that could be construed as cowardice by his disciples. But then again, what do you do when the whole thing is gone? That leads me to the third person in this group that I think is equally as important in the uniqueness of his story as the women who went to the tomb. What the heck was Thomas doing? And the other ones were hiding up in the upper room, and he was out? What was going on there? Did he just decide, you know what, this is just not happening. This is a waste of my time. I'm not even going to endure anymore trying to hold up Jesus' story because he's failed us, and just was going to go out and do the best he could. I've heard some say he went out to get groceries for everyone. Maybe they drew lots to see who would go out and take care of that for the day. Or maybe he didn't know what to do and couldn't just sit there, and so he had to go for a walk. Which I know that there are times when I'm stressed out. That's an easy way for me to relieve my stress. Maybe he wasn't seen as one of the disciples, and so was able to go out and about. Or maybe he was wanting to be arrested and killed just to get it all over with because the pain and the hurt of the betrayal was too much. We don't know, but all of these are likely possibilities. But while he's out, Jesus comes and gives comfort to these disciples that are terrified out of their minds, up in the upper room, locked away because they don't want to face the world. And instead of chastising them, instead of condemning them or criticizing them, he starts out with, Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you. There's no conflict there. They are at peace with one another. Now, if you're terrified of facing down danger and threat, that's got to be an incredibly comforting thing to know that sometimes even when we run away, God still meets us there. When we run to the tomb to take care of what we're supposed to do no matter what, God meets us there. But you ever wonder why Jesus seemed to deliberately show up in the upper room when Thomas wasn't there? Wouldn't it have made more logical sense for Jesus to have shown up when everyone was there? I mean, come on, maximize your timing a little bit here. Does it seem strange to you that he would ignore Thomas? I wish I knew the answer to that, because I feel like there's some sort of thematic, dramatic irony being brought here. But what I like is that Thomas is showing an authenticity that the other disciples could not have because they did not have his courage for whatever reason. Spoon and I were talking about this, and she's steeped in Hegel, which is one of my favorite philosophers as well, looking at how the women were the thesis, the pro. The other disciples were the sort of, I don't know what to do. And Thomas was the con of, unless I see for myself, I will not believe. I don't care about your experience. That's yours. You get to have it. That's wonderful. Believe away. But I cannot trust this until I have seen it for myself. I think, at least in my mind, what Jesus is doing here is giving room for the fact that in any real relationship, if there is a betrayal of trust, even if it was what had to happen, even if it was told to you, even if you knew it was coming, the betrayal of trust and the trauma that would be experienced if you were one of Jesus' followers is one that deserves and requires an explanation by God. It's like God being told, you got some explaining to do. As Paul Tillich says, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is belief. Thomas's doubt is a sacred and necessary step in the story to say, hey, God, what are you doing here? Keep in mind, one of the favorite clobber passages that people like to quote is John 14:6, which says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Well, what was going on before that? Thomas plays a role. Jesus says, I'm going to my Father, and then I will return, and I'm going to prepare a place for you, and where I go, you will follow. And Thomas, in true Thomas fashion, is like, no, Jesus, we don't know where you're going. How can we follow you? And Jesus was like, Thomas. I am the way, the truth, and life, etc., etc. Who do you think you might be in this situation? Do you think you might be one of the women? You're like, well, I don't care what happened. I'm going to take care of things that are supposed to be done. Are you one of the men who are like, you know what? I thought this was the thing. It's not, and my life is at stake. I'm going to go hide. Or are you Thomas who's like, well, whatever happens, we're going to just figure this. It's either going to be real or it's not. And Jesus meets all of them where they are. Did anyone deserve necessarily, one way or the other, to be visited by Jesus that way? No. Most of Jesus' disciples, ran away or betrayed him or denied him. The women were terrified. And Thomas is like, unless I know for a fact that this is real, I'm not going to follow anymore. But Jesus recognizes that for something as powerful as the sacrifice that he made, as terrifying as that betrayal of the assumptions that people had of what the Messiah meant, required compassion and meeting people where they are. And so Jesus came back the second time, I think intentionally making sure that Thomas wasn't there so that this would be included, so that Thomas would be given the opportunity to see for himself. And what's neat about this story is that Thomas, at least according to historical legend, began a mission that went all the way to the west coast of India. And his church or his group were there well into the 2nd century and became established as part of Indian culture, things that we didn't know about much growing up in the West. So the neat thing about the story is that the resurrection is just the beginning. In fact, all the fanfare and all the glory that is Easter Sunday is a really bizarre thing if you think about what it was like for his followers that first Easter Sunday. There was no light, there was no joy, there was no hope, there was no peace. It was all gone to pot. He was gone. What are we going to do? But it transforms these assumptions and invites people into the recognition that things never quite go the way we think they're supposed to. And it becomes even more than we could have ever imagined. But it requires faithful, authentic engagement with God that both includes faithfulness to things no matter what, acknowledgement of our fears, and also authentic willingness to say, God, I can't do this. I need you to give me this in order to be able to follow you. And then when God gives it to you, against all odds, you go, okay, I'm good. I can do this. So if you're struggling with doubts about life, you're struggling with doubts about your faith, struggling with doubts about anything, that's a sacred thing. And if you don't allow God to speak to us in a way that may not be the way we expected, not the way we hoped, not the way we were sold that it was going to be, we can find things that otherwise would not have been possible, would not have been there. And that is one of the gifts that Thomas gives us today, is that leadership of faithful doubt, faithful skepticism, and faithful willingness for God to allow God to show something that otherwise would not have made possible his life and his journey. So may we follow suit with Thomas or the women or the disciples, wherever you find yourself, and probably some combination among them. Seek God where God is being found, not where we necessarily think God might be, but seeing where God is leading us so that we can participate and further that resurrected life, not least of which through our own willingness to say, God, you got to show me what's going on here, because I will not trust this until you have shown that you are still trustworthy after what has just happened. Amen.